My mom showed up at my wedding with her newly adopted son, seemingly replacing me. I am a 29-year-old man about to marry the love of my life, and everything leading up to the big day had been going wonderfully. My fiancé, 27, and I had been planning this wedding for months. We were both incredibly excited. Everything was falling into place. The venue, the dress, the caterers, even the difficult relatives had RSVP'd. I was also pleased to have so many extra RSVPs. Even the difficult relatives had RSVPs. My family seemed supportive, and I felt like, after all the craziness, things were finally coming together. But all of this was before I had a conversation with my mom, who is 55. To say we have a complicated relationship would be an understatement. She has never been an emotional person, and growing up, she was distant. She constantly compared me to my older brother, who passed away when I was 16. It always felt like I could never measure up to his memory. After his death, our lives never quite returned to normal. My mom didn't know how to be a mother without him, and I didn't know how to get her attention without feeling like I was stepping into his shoes. It's hard to describe, but we never seemed to understand each other. When I told her about the wedding, her reaction was strange. She seemed happy, or at least she acted like it, but there wasn't the kind of excitement you'd expect. There was no, "I'm so proud of you," or "This is the happiest day of my life." Instead, she just nodded, gave a vague smile, and went about her day. It was typical behavior for her. A few weeks before the wedding, she called me and said she'd be bringing someone special and asked me to save a seat for him. At first, I assumed she meant a new boyfriend, but then she dropped a bombshell. She had adopted someone, a man in his late 20s, the same age as me. I didn't know how to process that information. I wasn't even aware she'd been thinking about adoption. We weren't particularly close, but it felt like something I should have known. The whole thing felt strange, but I shrugged it off. My mom was always doing random, unexpected things and then abandoning them after a few months. I figured this was just another one of those phases and decided not to dwell on it. As the wedding approached, her behavior became even more unusual. She barely contacted me. No calls, no updates, just complete silence. This was my big day, and she didn't even check in. I found it odd, but was too caught up in the chaos of last-minute preparations to give it much thought. Then, on the wedding day, everything seemed to go wrong. The flowers were late, the caterer kept calling me every 5 minutes, and my groomsmen were scrambling to sort out all the details. My mom, however, was nowhere to be found. She didn't send a single text or call. Even hours before the ceremony, I hadn't heard from her. I told myself not to panic. She'd show up, she had to, right? As the ceremony was about to start, I was backstage trying to gather my thoughts. That's when I saw her. My mom walked in, and with her was the man she had adopted. My heart sank. But it wasn't just her arrival that shocked me. It was what she did next. She walked straight to the front of the room, to the seat that had always been reserved for my late brother. This seat, which had been kept empty at family gatherings to honor his memory, was sacred. But on that day, she guided her newly adopted son to it and seated him there as if it were nothing. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My stomach dropped, my thoughts raced, and I felt completely unmoored. What was happening? Was I imagining this? Somehow, I managed to walk up to her, struggling to hold myself together, but when I opened my mouth to speak, I found I could barely form the words. I confronted her, asking what was going on and why he was sitting there. She replied with a straight face, "This is my son now. He's going to take your place." I had never felt so blindsided in my entire life. My own mother, in front of all our family, was acting as though I no longer mattered, as if I was the one who didn't belong at my own wedding. My fiancé's eyes widened in shock, and I could tell she was just as stunned as I was. In fact, it seemed to affect her even more deeply. She started whispering to me, urging that maybe we should cancel the whole thing. The tension in the room was unbearable. My family, who had eagerly awaited this day, was silent, simply staring. Some whispered among themselves while others were frozen, unable to react. I felt the heavy weight of their judgment and confusion. At that moment, I realized it wasn't just me who felt betrayed. My mom wasn't merely causing drama. She was creating a spectacle. She was forcing me to choose between my family and my future, and I had no idea how to navigate that. I wanted to move forward with the wedding if I could spend months preparing for this day, but how could I with my mom behaving this way and the entire day descending into chaos? I was completely lost on what to do. The moment she entered with her newly adopted son, it felt like my sanity was slipping. The wedding day, something I had planned and dreamed about for months, was unraveling into a disaster. I could hear whispers from all around the room, but I was frozen, unable to move. The worst part was that I had to confront my mom in front of everyone. I couldn't let her actions ruin everything, so I walked over to her, my anger and confusion boiling over. When I reached her, I demanded to know what was happening and why she had brought him. She barely acknowledged me, almost as if a real conversation wasn't worth her time. "This is my new family now," she said. "You need to accept it." I was at a loss for words. Was she serious? She had brought a man my age to take my place at my own wedding and was now acting like I should just accept it without question. Pressed her for answers, asking why she chose this day, of all days, to do something like this. This was the one thing I had spent months preparing for, but my mom didn't seem to care. She told me she had been searching for closure for years, and this new son was the solution. According to her, he filled the void left by my late brother, who had passed away years ago. It made no sense to me. Closure? By adopting someone who resembled my brother? It felt less like healing and more like she was trying to replace him, as if she was erasing the past entirely. It was as though I didn't matter to her anymore. Meanwhile, her newly adopted son behaved as if nothing was wrong. He kept calling me dear and acted all supportive, as if I was the one overreacting. At one point, he even tried to put his arm around me and said everything would be fine. It made me feel like I was losing my grip on reality. He was playing the role of a kind, understanding stepson, while I stood there, watching my mother emotionally abandon me. The atmosphere in the room was tense. Silence hung heavy as my family tried to process what was happening. My grandparents were furious, and my dad's side of the family looked equally confused, unsure of how to react. Everyone was upset that my mom would pull something like this on the most important day of my life. But my mom? She seemed completely unaffected. I asked her again why she chose today to do this, why she thought it was acceptable to bring him to my wedding in front of everyone. Her response was typical of her. "Just let it go," she said. "It's time for you to accept this. This is my new family." It was as though she couldn't even comprehend how deeply her actions had hurt me. She seemed blind to the pain she was causing. I turned to my fiancée, hoping she might have a solution, but even she looked uncertain. She had been my anchor through everything, but now she whispered to me, asking if we should just cancel the wedding. Hearing her say that felt like a punch to the gut. But she wasn't wrong. How could we move forward when my own mother couldn't even respect me on my wedding day? I didn't want to throw away everything I had worked so hard for. I didn't want my mom's behavior to destroy the future I had planned with my fiancé, but as things escalated, it became clear that we couldn't fix this, not now. So I made the only decision I could think of. I announced that we were postponing the wedding. My heart raced as I made the announcement, and I saw the decision on my face as I saw the gathered for the ceremony. But under these circumstances, going through with it felt impossible. A fiancé and I needed time to figure things out. The last thing I wanted was to make a choice we'd regret later. As I stepped away to process everything, I could hear my mom in the background telling everyone that family is what truly matters. She didn't care about the wedding or what her actions meant for me. All that seemed important to her was this new dynamic she had created, this new son who had become her priority. I left the room, needing to get away. My emotions were overwhelming me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think clearly. I broke down crying in a back room, feeling utterly lost and abandoned. It was as though I had become invisible to my own mother, the one person who should have been by my side, supporting me on what was supposed to be the most important day of my life. She had turned into a stranger, and the wedding was officially postponed. I couldn't marry my fiancé under these circumstances, not when my mother had destroyed any hope of family unity. The chaos she unleashed in that single moment made me question everything I thought I knew about my family. The questions about her motives, about why she would act this way, loomed too large to ignore. I felt utterly betrayed, but I realized I couldn't make any decisions while overwhelmed with emotions. I decided to take a step back. I needed time to reflect on my future, on what I wanted, and what I was willing to tolerate. If my mother couldn't respect that, then perhaps it was time to cut her out of my life. For now, though, the wedding was off, and the emotional fallout was only beginning. After we postponed the wedding, things didn't settle down. In fact, they grew worse. The situation with my mother and her adopted son kept spiraling out of control. It felt like nobody fully understood how deep this issue ran, and my mom refused to acknowledge that she'd done anything wrong. I tried to approach her again, determined to get some answers. I couldn't just let it go. We needed to discuss what had happened and why she thought it was acceptable to show up with him and take my place. But when I sat down with her, she dismissed me once again. She kept saying it was all a misunderstanding and accused me of being overly sensitive. I was stunned. Every time I tried to get a clear response, she simply deflected. Her new son remained ever present, attending every family gathering as though he had always been a part of our lives. I couldn't avoid him. He was everywhere, calling me bro like we'd been close for years. He even started imitating my late brother, copying his style, wearing the same kinds of clothes and mimicking his mannerisms. It was deeply unsettling. I wasn't the only one who noticed either. My entire family began picking up on it. But when I confronted my mom about this, she brushed it off. She defended her actions, saying this was the only way she could move forward. She claimed she needed closure after my brother's death, and insisted that adopting this man, who, by the way, is my age, was the only thing that made sense to her. She said it helped her fill the void he left behind. Her words felt like a slap in the face. Both sides of my grandparents were furious. They couldn't understand how my mom could do something so disrespectful to me. How could she bring someone into the family who was so close to my age and act like I didn't matter? Behind her back, they talked about her decision, trying to make sense of what she was thinking. But my mom refused to listen. To her, everything she did was justified. It didn't matter that she was tearing apart the foundation of our family. She was convinced she was just trying to heal from her grief. Meanwhile, the tension in my relationship with my fiancé was growing worse by the day. She started questioning whether I was still the person she thought I was. She told me that if I couldn't stand up to my mother, she didn't know how we could move forward as a couple. Her words were painful to hear, but I knew she wasn't wrong. She was furious at my mom, and her frustration began to spill over onto me. She felt like she couldn't trust me anymore. It became clear that my mother's actions were jeopardizing my relationship with the person I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. Some family members took my side, expressing outrage at what my mom had done. They saw how unfair it was. Others, however, sympathized with her. They thought I was overreacting, or believed I should be more understanding given that she was grieving. They couldn't see that this wasn't just about her grief. It was about boundaries, respect, and my place in the family. Even my friends started weighing in. Some suggested that my mom and I try therapy, saying it might help us work through everything. My fiancé supported the idea, but when I brought it up to my mom, she flat out refused. She insisted she didn't need therapy and denied that anything about her behavior was wrong. She made it clear she wasn't going to change her mind or actions. As time went on, her new son's behavior only became more unsettling. He started showing up at family events, dressed like my brother, using his phrases and mimicking his gestures. It was as though he was trying to assume my brother's role. Every time I saw him, I couldn't shake the feeling that my mom was trying to replace my brother, and me as well. I began having more serious conversations with my fiancé about what to do next. Should I keep trying to work things out with my mom? Or should I walk away? My fiancé's patience was running thin. She told me she wasn't sure if she could marry me if my mom continued disrespecting me like this. It felt like a breaking point. I wanted to be with her, but I didn't know how to repair this family dynamic. How could I ask her to marry into a family so divided and broken? At that moment, I knew I had to make a choice. My mom was never going to apologize sincerely for what she'd done. If she said she was sorry, it was only ever a half-hearted apology meant to end the conversation. She admitted she didn't realize how much her actions had hurt me, but she stood firm that her new son was staying. She wasn't going to change, and I knew that. So, it all came down to one decision. Would I stand up for myself, or would I keep trying to salvage a relationship with someone who clearly didn't care? I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to cut her out of my life for good, but at the same time I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when it so obviously wasn't. The wedding remained on hold, and I was trapped in a strange limbo. The strain between my mom and me, and between my fiancé and me, grew worse every day. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that whatever choice I made would change everything. I had to decide if fighting for a family that had already turned its back on me was worth it. The wedding is now officially cancelled. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. After everything that had happened, it became clear that I couldn't get married with my mother's behavior hanging over me like a dark cloud. It wasn't just the shock of her showing up with her new son, it was all the lies and chaos that followed. The manipulation, the endless gaslighting, it became too much to bear. I didn't want to cancel the wedding after spending so much time, energy, and money preparing for it. But after that moment with my mother, I couldn't bring myself to go through with it. My relationship with her had completely fallen apart. How could I marry someone knowing my own mother didn't respect me? How could I act like everything was fine when it clearly wasn't? Even after the wedding was officially cancelled, my mom behaved as if nothing had happened. She wouldn't acknowledge the pain she had caused. It was like she was living in a world of her own where nothing had changed. She kept calling and texting me, acting as though everything was normal, as if she hadn't just turned my entire life upside down. I tried addressing the issue with her again, but she either brushed me off or acted like I was exaggerating. She wouldn't admit she'd done anything wrong. Bringing this man into our family and treating him like he was my brother had caused irreparable harm, but she refused to take responsibility. If that wasn't bad enough, my relationships with the rest of my family started to suffer. Some relatives sided with me, understanding how disrespectful my mom's actions had been, while others blamed me. They argued that I should have handled the situation differently, or tried harder to empathize with her grief. It felt like I was caught between two worlds, those who supported me and those who justified my mom's behavior. Despite this, it was impossible to overlook that my mom was the one who had caused the most harm. I wasn't ready to forgive her. I decided to start therapy to help me process everything that had happened. I needed to understand why my mother acted the way she did and figure out how to deal with the aftermath. Therapy helped to some degree, but the more I discussed her behavior, the more I realized how emotionally manipulative she had always been. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was years of being pushed aside, constantly compared to my late brother, and never truly supported. Finally, I was beginning to see things clearly, and it was a difficult truth to accept. Meanwhile, my fiancée was starting to question everything. She felt deeply betrayed by my mom, but even worse, she began doubting whether our relationship could continue. She told me, She didn't think she could trust me anymore, especially since I hadn't stood up to my mother more assertively. And she was right. I had been so focused on trying to maintain some sense of normalcy with my mom that I failed to realize how important my fiancé's feelings were. She was beginning to feel like she couldn't marry into a family that was so fractured and disrespectful. I was at a loss. I wanted to make things work with her, but how could I when my family had become such a toxic battleground? Then, my mom made an empty attempt to smooth things over by giving me a family heirloom. I suppose it was her way of trying to make amends, but it felt hollow. A piece of jewelry or a sentimental object wasn't going to fix this. The issue wasn't about material things. It was about respect. She had disrespected both me and my fiancé, and no gift could undo that. To be honest, I didn't even want the heirloom. It felt insulting. It was as if she was trying to buy forgiveness instead of taking accountability for her actions. At the same time, my extended family was choosing sides. Some relatives expressed disappointment in my mom and understood why I was hurt. Others defended her, saying I should try to be more understanding of her need for closure. Hearing the same arguments over and over was exhausting. All I wanted was for someone to see the situation from my perspective, but it felt like nobody truly understood what I was going through. Then came the guilt trips. My mom began playing the victim, accusing me of not being understanding of her grief. She painted me as selfish, claiming I couldn't see things from her point of view. It made me feel like the villain, as if I were the one creating all the drama. No matter how hard I tried to explain that this wasn't about her grief, she refused to understand. She kept guilting me, saying how difficult it had been for her to move on, and insisting that I should be happy she'd found someone who brought her a sense of completeness. I didn't know what to do anymore. My fiancé and I tried couples therapy, but the tension was overwhelming. The pressure from my mom, the strain between my fiancé and me, and the constant push to choose between my family and my future were taking a heavy toll. My fiancé wasn't sure she could continue with the wedding, and I wasn't sure I could ask her to. Every time I tried to make a decision, it felt like my mom was still pulling the strings, manipulating the situation, and making me feel like it was my responsibility to fix everything. Meanwhile, my mom's new son only became more entrenched in the family dynamic. He kept attending family events, acting like he belonged, and slowly occupying the space that my late brother had once filled. It felt like my mom was erasing my brother's memory and replacing it with this man. It was deeply unsettling, and I didn't know how to stop it. Each day, it felt like my place in the family was slipping away. At this point, I knew I had to make a choice. Should I cut ties with my mom completely, or should I accept her and this new version of our family, flaws and all? I couldn't keep living in limbo, torn between my mom and my fiancé. Something had to change, but I didn't know what. The fallout from the cancelled wedding was far worse than I could have anticipated. The drama from that day didn't end when I called it off. It rippled through my entire family, and it felt like it would never stop. People began talking behind my back, gossiping about the situation, and before long, the family was divided into two camps. Some supported me, recognizing how wrong my mom's actions were, while others defended her, trying to justify her behavior as a response to her grief. As the weeks went on, things only got worse. My fiancée, who had stood by me through all the chaos, finally reached her breaking point. The constant tension, the unrelenting stress, and my inability to resolve the situation were too much for her. She told me she couldn't live like this anymore. The thought of marrying into a family that had treated me so poorly was unbearable for her. We ended our engagement. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I loved her, and I still do, but when your own mother treats you like you don't matter, when she replaces you with someone else, it changes everything. Our relationship couldn't survive that. This was supposed to be the happiest time of my life, but instead, it became the most painful. My mom didn't seem to comprehend the damage she'd caused. In a private conversation, she tried to justify her actions once again. insisting that she'd been grieving for years and that this new son was the only way she could fill the void left by my brother. She even said I should be happy for her that she had finally found a way to move on. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was as if she was completely ignoring how much this was hurting me. She hadn't even stopped to think about how her actions were impacting my life, my relationships, or my future. The harder she pushed this new son into my life, the more isolated I felt. I started questioning where I stood with her. Did I even matter anymore? Or had I become an afterthought? It seemed like the adopted son was now her priority, not me. No matter how hard I tried to keep the peace, I couldn't ignore that this was a situation I couldn't accept. This new son, meanwhile, was becoming more and more integrated into the family. He began attending family functions and showing up for holidays, and every time I saw him, it felt like I was being edged out. It wasn't just his presence, it was the way he was treated, like my brother, as if he had always been a part of the family. My dad and stepmom eventually reached out to me, both furious at what my mom had done. They couldn't understand how she could replace me so easily, how she could bring this man into the family and act as though he belonged. They wanted to support me, but at the same time, they didn't want to get caught in the middle of my mom's manipulations. It was a difficult position for them because they knew that standing up to her would mean dealing with her full-blown anger. After much back and forth, my mom finally agreed to attend therapy with me, but it quickly became clear that she wasn't open to changing. She was still consumed by her grief and couldn't see past it. In her mind, I was supposed to accept this new family dynamic and move on. I tried to explain that I couldn't just forget what had happened, but she refused to see my side. Therapy didn't solve anything. It felt like she was going through the motions without any real intention of making amends. Friends and family kept urging me to cut ties with her completely. They couldn't understand why I had let things get to this point, why I hadn't made the decision to walk away sooner. But cutting off your own mother, no matter how toxic the relationship, isn't something you do lightly. So I kept trying to salvage whatever I could. Yet as the weeks went by, it became harder and harder to hold everything together. Then I hit my breaking point. A few weeks later, I had an emotional meltdown. I felt completely lost. I didn't know who to trust anymore. My family was divided, and the person I had always believed I could rely on, my mom, was the one who had hurt me the most. I felt betrayed, isolated, and utterly alone. I started to distance myself from her, both emotionally and physically. I stopped answering her calls and responding to her texts. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but I knew it was necessary. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. I needed space and time to figure out who I was outside of the chaos she had created. Thankfully, my dad stepped in to help me process what I was going through. He was devastated by my mom's behavior and encouraged me to focus on healing instead of trying to fix something that couldn't be repaired. He told me that sometimes to protect yourself, you have to walk away. As hard as it was to admit, I knew he was right. But my mom didn't take the emotional distance well. She grew angry with me, accusing me of not understanding her grief. She even called me selfish, saying I wasn't allowing her to move on. It was as if she couldn't see that this wasn't about her grief. It was about respect, boundaries, and my mental well-being. To make matters worse, the new son took things further. He messaged me, telling me I needed to move past it and accept him as part of the family. He even hinted that we should build a sibling dynamic together. That was the final straw. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine, especially when it felt like I no longer had a place in a family that had so easily replaced me. I made my decision. I had to completely cut ties with my mom and her adopted son. As painful as it was, it felt like the only way to protect my mental health and rebuild my life. It wasn't an easy choice, but it was the only one that made sense. I couldn't stay in a family that didn't respect me, and I couldn't keep pretending things would magically get better. For the first time in years, I was taking control of my own life, even if it meant walking away from the family I once knew. It's been a few months since I decided to cut ties with my mom. The pain hasn't disappeared, but deep down I know I made the right choice. I wish things could have been different, but I had to prioritize my mental health and peace of mind over a relationship that was never really there for me. Reflecting on everything that happened, I've come to realize that my mom's behavior isn't new. Looking back, I can see how emotionally distant she's always been. Even as a child, I was never her priority. My late brother's memory always loomed over me, like a shadow I couldn't escape. But I hadn't fully grasped how damaging that was until now. It's as if I spent my whole life trying to earn her love and approval, even though she was never truly capable of giving it. Her actions in recent months have only made that clearer. During the wedding chaos and its aftermath, my friends and extended family stepped up in ways I hadn't expected. They became my support system, helping me navigate the mess. They reassured me that I had made the right decision to cut my mom out of my life. Having people who genuinely understand and stand by you makes all the difference. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel completely alone. Therapy has also played a major role in my healing. I've been working through the trauma of my mom's betrayal and learning how to move forward. One of the most important lessons I've taken away is the importance of setting boundaries, especially with people who don't respect you. For years, I let my mom manipulate me into believing I wasn't worthy of love or respect. Now I'm learning to stop tolerating that kind of behavior from anyone, and it's incredibly empowering. Therapy has shown me that I don't need to prove myself to anyone. I am enough just as I am. I haven't heard from my mom in months, and while part of me wonders if she's tried to reach out in other ways, I've made the decision to stay firm in my choice to cut contact. She hasn't even apologized, and until she does, I can't let her back into my life. It's still difficult to fully accept that my mom, the person who was supposed to support me the most, chose to push me away, but I know I'm doing what's best for me. My ex-fiancé and I are no longer in contact. After everything that happened with my mom and how the wedding fell apart, our relationship didn't survive. While I'll always care for her, I've come to terms with the fact that it wasn't meant to be. She had her own struggles, dealing with my mom's behavior, and I can't blame her for not wanting to remain in a relationship so tied to that much pain. I can't hold on to what we had, even though letting go hasn't been easy. We both needed different things, and I've made peace with that. On a brighter note, I've started dating again. It's been a slow and cautious process, but I'm taking my time. I don't want to bring someone new into my life until I've worked through my own emotional baggage. I've realized that before I can fully commit to someone else, I need to take care of myself first. This feels like a fresh start, and I'm determined to ensure I'm in a healthy place, mentally and emotionally, before jumping into anything serious. A few weeks ago, I received a message from my mom's new son. He tried to guilt-trip me, saying I should reconcile with my mom and accept him as part of the family. I didn't reply. I can't keep letting people pressure me into doing something I'm not ready for. It feels like he's trying to force his way into my life in a way that isn't welcome. I'm not going to pretend everything's fine just to make him feel better. For the first time in years, I'm beginning to feel a sense of peace. I've shifted my focus to building a life that doesn't depend on my family's approval. I don't need my mom's acceptance to be happy. I don't have to keep trying to mend a relationship that was never truly healthy to begin with. I'm creating my own path, and while it hasn't always been easy, it's mine. Not long ago, I received a letter from my mom. It was an apology of sorts, though it felt more like a desperate attempt to get me to forgive her. She asked me to reconsider and open up to her again. I haven't opened the letter yet. It feels like too little, too late. Maybe one day I'll read it, but for now I'm not ready to face it. My decision is final, and I don't think anything will change that. I've been spending a lot of time with my dad, stepmom, and extended family. They've been nothing but supportive, and I've realized I'm not as alone as I once thought. They've played a big role in helping me heal, and I'm so thankful for their presence in my life. I've come to understand that I don't need my mom's approval anymore because I already have the love and support of the people who genuinely care about me. Still, the weight of the past lingers. I spent so many years trying to earn my mom's love, always holding on to the hope that one day she'd change. Letting go of that hope has been one of the hardest things I've ever done, but I'm making progress. This experience has taught me a lot, especially about the importance of healthy boundaries, self-respect, and having the courage to walk away from toxic relationships. Looking ahead, I'm focused on building the life I want. I may never have the mother I wished for, but I'm learning to create my own family with people who truly care about me, and that's enough. I've learned to love and respect myself, and I've discovered that I'm stronger than I ever imagined. This is a new beginning, and I'm ready for whatever comes next.